on this computer. Okay, so we're live now. And so everybody here knows Shane already. So Shane's actually in New Zealand right now. He's back with his peeps.
Mm-hmm. Make this more worldly.
That's right. Just wait a minute. I have to ask you, what is a New Zealand national food? Like, what's a New Zealand? Like in America, we got the hamburger.
Oh gosh. I mean, it's very natural. I mean, lamb. I guess it's very meat and veggies over here. But quite creative versions of it. A lot of influences from around the world. So I don't know what's the New Zealand food. It's very similar to Australia. A lot of barbecues, pavlova. But we're very. It's funny being back here. You see a lot of the foods in the hotels that we're in. It's like very traditional.
Oh,
With a lot of
right.
sauces, big on sauces. A lot of sauces.
Okay.
Got crazy.
Well, what about the locals? I mean, the Aborigines. What do they call themselves?
That's Maoris.
So what would be like a one of those cuisines here?
Yeah, they call it it's called the hangi, which is the version of the Hawaiian luau.
Oh, all right. I like that, man. Mary Sue, welcome. Welcome. We have. Hello, welcome. Okay. So we were just Shane here. He's right now happens to be in New Zealand. Actually, that's where he's from, and we're just trying to understand, like, what is the New Zealand cuisine? So so we were hearing some good stuff here.
Very cool.
Yeah. So all right. So welcome. Yeah. Were you on with us before, Mary?
Yes, I was. Yep.
I said it's Mary Sue. Do you like to be called Mary or Mary Sue or?
It doesn't matter. You can call me Mary. You can call me Mary Sue. You can call me MSG. It doesn't matter.
MSG. That sounds cool. Madison Square Gardens. I like the branding.
All right. Well, listen. We're before we get too hungry, listen to this whole cuisine thing. Let's let Shane do his thing and feed us on some culture hacking. Go right ahead, Shane.
All right, guys. Thanks very much for joining us today. So we're going to kind of touch into the whole idea of recruitment and just some of the ideas around recruitment that we've seen over the years and talk about some of the things that are going on right now. Like all the sort of the Culture Hacker seminars, kind of begin with some background that I think most of you probably know already. But just remember, everything when it comes to the idea of culture starts with this idea of attitude. And it's really important to remember that culture is about the collective mindset and attitude and feelings of employees. So you're always looking at this collective group. Overall, how are they feeling? And so as we've been, by the last 5 years, sort of studying this, we've really been paying attention to the employee journey and what is influencing their behavior and attitudes. And again, it's really important to understand that those behaviors, as they start to manifest itself and come out, they're really impacting a company's reputation today, particularly with the online social media driven world. And so we've been studying what are these different mechanisms within the employee journey, different activities and how managers influence how an employee feels about what they do and who they do it for. And we've kind of touched on there's probably about 15, 16, but we're really focusing on what we call our top 11. And what we're doing over these webinars is really touching on these sort of the important ones, the things that really start to stand out. Some of you have been in our other 2 webinars where we've talked about leadership, and last time we talked about values. And so this time we're going to focus in on this idea of recruitment. And I think it's really important to sort of understand that who you're hiring has a really tremendous impact on how your other employees are feeling about what they do and who they do it for. In fact, it says a lot. Quite often, I think managers underestimate the impact of when they hire a person, introduce them to the group. What the group is looking at is going, what is the quality of this person coming in? Because it really speaks to volumes to them as a group and how the manager sees them. So I think managers often forget that this is a really crucial decision. In fact, I would argue in many organizations today, it's probably the most important decision being made about who to hire and in some cases who to let go. But I love this quote by Bob Callaher here. Said, quite often companies talk about having engagement issues. What we've found and what we've seen heavily out there is that they have a hiring issue. they're hiring the wrong people. And it's starting to really show up in a lot of stats as well, because the number of people that are leaving jobs within the first 90 days is quite incredible. In fact, half of all people that left jobs voluntarily last year did so in the first 90 days. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that it wasn't a good match. And we're seeing this more and more with young people. People often say young people are not loyal. It's actually not about loyalty. They're actually quite a loyal group. What it is that they're not afraid to jump ship quickly when they realize they've made a bad decision, which is quite a mature actually approach from this younger generation of workers. And so what they're looking for all the time is this match. And if they don't feel that there is a match, whether it's through the organization, whether it's through the manager, they're quickly going to sort of bail. So I think it puts even more emphasis on getting the recruitment right and really making sure that we're getting the right people. And listen, I'll tell you up front, there is not a 100% guarantee that the person you're going to hire is going to be perfect. But what we try to do is we reduce the likelihood that they're not going to be right. It's like I'm originally from Vegas, or I'm from Vegas right now, even though I'm in New Zealand, and it's all about the odds. And that's what recruitment is for us. It's about what are you doing to reduce the odds of creating or making a bad hire. Now, I want to make sure what recruitment is. People often sort of lump this together. Recruitment is about attracting, shortlisting, selecting, and appointing. It comes in for a lot of things. And the thing that I want to really focus on today is attracting and selecting, because there are two very important elements in this process to help you get the right candidate. Shortlisting is how do you narrow the group down? We touched on that a little. And obviously the appointment process is actually putting the offer out, but it's where attracting and selecting where we see a lot of the problems occur. So our first question is to kind of understand what is job fit. And there's two sort of ideas that I want to put out there: job fit and cultural match. And these two ideas need to be really front and center in what you're thinking about. So when we talk about job fit, I want you to understand it's about the skills, expertise, and experience to do a job. What are the minimum requirements? Now, I'm going to tell you that most jobs do not have a lot of skills, expertise, or experience required. Managers like that, and we'll talk about that in a little while, because it actually creates a problem. We've got an experience addiction where people are so focused in on the experience that they've had in terms of the hiring process that they actually overlook some of the best candidates. What we've seen is that most jobs, you can teach the necessary skills, give them some expertise to be successful. Not all, but for the most part, I think that's important. But certain jobs have certain minimum requirements, so that's your job fit. And then you got to focus on what cultural match is. This means that they adhere to and have a set of values and a personality, disposition, attitude that seems to align really well with the organization. And this is where I really urge, and again, for those of you that was involved in our last webinar talking about values, one of the most important reasons why values are critical is it allows you to understand what this cultural match is. What are the cultural ideals for people that will be successful in our organization? And again, it's ideals. I want to stress now, it's got nothing to do with color of the skin, religious, political orientation, sexual orientation. None of that matters. It's about what's inside. And it's this cultural kind of match of ideals that a lot of the research and what we've found, we're actually doing a study right now of a large company down in New Zealand. And it's funny because we've just got the results back. We do these cultural assessments. And one of the big areas that came up for the employees is, I think it was like first or second, was the selection process was the most important thing for them in terms of how they felt about doing their job. And as we dug a little deeper, just like I said before, they said when the wrong person gets selected, it puts so much burden on us. And when you dig deeper, it's not about them getting someone up to speed. It's about that someone's not a good team player. It's about someone doesn't have a great attitude or a strong work ethic. These are the words being used to describe why someone's not a good match for the job. Not that, well, they don't know how to do X or Y. So really important that you sort of think about those two ideas. We need both, all right? And that's an important. You want to find both, but what we've found is the job fit, those skills, is a lot less important than cultural match. And everything is kind of coming to that. And yet job fit is the main thing that people focus on. Now, what do we want to, I want to start talking a little bit about attraction here, because attraction is a really important piece of this. And again, I want you to understand the process that a candidate or prospective candidate goes through. You know, when someone's looking for a job, and by the way, probably half the people right now in a job are always looking for a job. They do four things. And this is really key to understand their thinking, because when it comes to attracting, we find a lot of companies are really bad at this. They just kind of assume they've got a job, therefore, you know, people will come. But to get the right candidate, potential candidates will search for the company in the news. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is that if a company has some bad news in the news, it does impact their ability to hire a quality candidate. So keep that in mind. Often companies going through some sort of crisis or bad news, they will see a lull in potential candidates coming through the door, and vice versa. If there's good news out there, they'll generally get a lot more candidates. One of the best examples, you know, going back a few years now, was Netflix. Everyone wanted to be part of Netflix. Why? Because it was the best news story out there. Everyone was talking about it, and they were inundated with candidates. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because part of their strategy, I think, is quite useful. Glassdoor is becoming a big one. I talk to a lot of managers who are still going, Glassdoor is not meaningful. Glassdoor is becoming extremely meaningful, whether you like it or not, because candidates are going on, people are going on and writing about it. One of the things I think that's so important that we've learned about our community-based society is that as managers, we can complain all we like. Well, Glassdoor is not meaningful. It's just a bunch of people who got fired who are very negative. I'm not arguing that point. What I am saying is, though, there's still hundreds, thousands of people going on to Glassdoor every year, leaving a review about companies. That you can't stop that. And the reality is that particularly for young people, Glassdoor is one of the areas they will go to look about your company. So I always ask the hiring managers, what's your Glassdoor review look like? You know, when was the last time you went in and looked at it? And then more importantly, what are you doing about it? Because again, like all of these ranking sites or these community feedback sites, the number one goal is, if you've got a bad review and no one else is posting any reviews, that bad review can sit around a long period of time. So if you ask anybody, what's the number one, if I got a bad review on Glassdoor, what do? I said, you need a lot of good employees going on and writing good reviews. It pushes down the ranking. And so it's not the first thing they see when they go into Glassdoor. So keep that in mind. And then the next thing they do is they go into your website. So they go into your website and they're looking at mission and values. Now, as I talked about in the last webinar, companies are usually pretty good about putting this up on their website. But what I want you to understand is that you're seeing more and more young people pay a lot of attention to the values and mission. And I'm going to tell you now, they are looking to see in the interview process, when we get to this, whether or not you actually bring those to life. So I said under values, you know, a lot of the times companies will put it up on their website, put it up as a poster on the wall, and it's just some philosophical bullshit. I want you to understand, these young candidates are going in, they're making a note of the values, and do not be surprised if they ask a question. And I can tell you that in the interview process, one of the things that it's become really popular is they ask to have a walk around, and they are looking to see whether or not your values are alive and well. So keep this in mind. Again, as we get down the track, we'll kind of address this. And then the final thing is they're looking for your employee value proposition. This is an EVP. I want to make sure that everybody understands this. This is absolutely critical to attracting the right candidates. I still can't believe so many companies, large and small, have not addressed and understand what their EVP is. It is their value proposition. What are they offering someone in terms of benefit, experience, etc., for coming to work with us? And it is so critical that this is laid out up front. Now, a lot of the times companies are investing in hiring portals. And I can't stress this enough, particularly for large companies. This is extremely important, where they are listing and very clearly clarifying what their benefits in that of coming to work for us is. Now, if you're a smaller company, you're probably not going to have that portal. But what I urge you to do is to think about having a really clear statement, and it can be a single piece of paper that really lays out that you can send automatically to any potential candidates. Here's what it means to work for us. And so this thing about EVP, and I want to talk about this, is really getting to the essence of your company, how it's unique, what it stands for, but it's really the reasons that people are proud and motivated to work there. Things that our candidates are looking for is conversation about career development. Probably one of the biggest things that are out there today is that in the EVP, they really want to understand if you have a commitment to growing, developing, and promoting from within. So keep that in mind as you're starting to do it. A lot of EVPs I see is probably only about 4 or 5 sentences long. It's relatively, relatively clear, concise, but it really lays things out. The other one is starting to look at benefits. They really look to see what are the key benefits for your organization. The ones that people are, and again, I'm going to go pre-COVID for a second because it really influences that people are looking for with things like flex work hours, flexibility into the schedule, reimbursement for education, or an education program was big. Now, obviously in COVID, the whole work from home flexibility, I think, is kind of jumped up at us, but it's still important that people are starting to call out some of the key benefits. It's not about listing all your benefits, but it's the key ones, the ones that make your employees who work for you now most proud. Another one that was pre-COVID that was very big was travel opportunities. That was a really big one for younger people, where they talked about the opportunity. One of the things that in hospitality, where we do a lot of our work, which is really great, is that there's usually an opportunity for hotel people to travel around a little bit. So as hotel companies promote that, if they've got an opportunity, multiple sites, they really talk up in their EVP the opportunity to travel around, experience different states, different countries as part of their value proposition. So I really want to stress and ask you, where is your value proposition? And then companies will say, well, how do I create this? Where do I get this from? I want to go back to that thing. It's what your current employees are most proud of. And just asking that question, what makes you most proud of working for this organization? We just asked that question to about 1,000, 1,100 people in this organization. And it came back that it was really clear about what the proposition was, which was growth and development, working for a high-end luxury brand that represented New Zealand in a really powerful way. Their community involvement was something that they were very proud of, and the fact that they were working for an international company. So that's the type of stuff that we look for. So please make sure that when it comes to attracting candidates, you've thought about this. What's the state of my company? Generally, you don't have control over that, but be aware there are certain times. And I would say that when there's good news about your company out there, that's a fantastic time to be promoting and attracting. And I always say this, is that you're always hiring, which means you're always attracting candidates. Just because you don't have a job opening does not mean that you're not trying to attract candidates. You're always looking. You never know when the next superstar is sitting out there. And I always believe that if a superstar walks through the door, you'll find a role for them. So keep that in mind. If there's something really positive out in the news, it's a great way to attract superstars. Check your Glassdoor. Make sure your website is up to date with mission and values, explaining it clearly. Just remember, though, that it will come back in the interview process, and then make sure you've got an EVP. So that's attracting. And I want to stress that right now. That's very important, because you're in a crowded marketplace. Everybody's looking for the next superstar. You've got to stand out, or at least be very clear and solid in what it is that you're attracting people to. So that's attraction. Any question? I want to sort of open that up a little bit before we go into the selection. Because again, we've attracted, which means we've got resumes coming across our desk. Any questions out there? MSG, Claudia, any questions? Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
Great. Okay, so let's kind of jump on. Let's talk about this now. The candidate experience. All right, so you got resumes coming through the door, and now it's about, okay, what does the experience look like? 60% of job seekers report having a poor candidate experience, and again, here it is. 72% of that 60%, and I want to kind of put that in a second, it's about 45% went onto Glassdoor and put a review up. And that's LinkedIn Business for 2018. So this is pretty relevant. So really, really important here. So I got a question for you guys. MSG, Claudia, out there, what do you think research tells us are the most important considerations for a candidate during their interview process? And again, this is getting to the interview, what happens in the interview, all of the things. What do you think is the most important considerations that potential candidates have? So Claudia, I'm going to start with you. What do you think potential candidates say is the most important thing, or some of the most important things for them?
The body language.
Okay, body language. So
Yes.
that's actually quite deep in that in terms of the interviewer. I'm not sure if that's on our list that it came up, but certainly the interaction with the interviewer is on the list, so great. But even more simpler than that, what do you think job candidates, it's actually quite fascinating what their number one concern is, or the number one factor that helps them have a better experience versus a not so good one. And by the way, put yourself in a candidate's shoes, all right? How do they think they're feeling as they go into the interview? MSG, what do you think?
Personally, if I were the candidate, I want to make sure that I understand what the position is.
Okay,
I want
good.
a clear understanding of that. I want to know about growth opportunities. Going back to your growth and development, that's another important aspect. But I think the biggest thing would be probably just opportunity. Is there opportunity for growth?
Okay, these are all good, guys, but again, even more basic than that. A prospective candidate, when they're coming to the interview or the interview process, their number one thing that helps them have a good day, a good interview. And again, it's so basic, but it's one of the things that we often forget about.
What is it?
You want to know?
Yeah.
Is the location easy to find?
Location easy to find?
Yes.
Really?
Now think about this. Why does that sit at the top of their list of helping to make a good experience? Now, go to most candidates. They're a little nervous. It's like, got to get there on time. Have you ever had to be at an appointment and you had a real specific time and the location wasn't easy to find? You guys ever had that happen to you?
Yeah, but I make sure to give myself plenty of time to.
Okay, so you do, but again, you're smart, but does it create stress when you can't find the place?
If I'm unsure of it, I would typically try to find it before the interview.
Okay, good. But I'm going to tell you now that the number one thing that causes stress, which means it flusters them, it gets them really, is that the location is not easy. And so what we talk about with a lot of companies is they make an assumption that they'll give an address, but they don't make it so obvious. Now, obviously, in some situations, it's an office or it's a building and it's easy to find. But for candidates, making sure that the location is easy to find or that they can get to where they need to be without any stress is really important. And it's something that very few companies think about. Warm welcome, great. Interviewer being on time is really big for a candidate. You know what? They hate sitting and waiting. They notice that. And if you're going to be late, it's about letting them know. So having that basic courtesy. Did the interviewer allow me to ask questions? So that was an important piece of it. Often it's a one-way street. Obviously, the interviewer is gracious, respectful, friendly, and that some follow-up occurs regardless of the outcome. It's amazing how many organizations or how many people go through an interview and never actually hear from the company again. So what I want you to point out is like, these are just some basic courtesies, but they are assumptions that we often overlook. We jump right into, hey, the ideas of did they talk about the values? Is there growth opportunity? We focus on that and we make that right, but it's some of these basic elements that often get overlooked that make a huge, huge difference. All right, so what are the flaws? So my other question, so let's kind of go to this. The traditional interview process has some very inherent flaws in it. I want to ask you guys what you think. Mark, are you there? Are you able to jump in and comment on this? I'm interested in your thoughts. What do you think some of the inherent flaws are in the interview process as it stands today? I think you're on mute. Is it? Mark, turn up your.
Sorry, I always forget it's on here. I think that as far as the interviewing process for a candidate, I think we're relying on a lot of old questions and not really dealing with what's current. By that, I'll say, for instance, you go for a sales job. Someone might put up a pen and say, "Sell me this pen." That'll be your job interview.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, I've seen that still even going on these days. But I think walking in with a conversation instead of a checklist is helpful. Instead of creating a questionnaire structure, which could be filled out by the person in advance, you're not there for that. You're there for human skills. You're there for communication skills. You're there for understanding who the person is, maybe beyond what you could interpret in paper.
Yeah, listen, I think you hit on a couple of nice ones kind of there. Mary, Claudia, any other thoughts of what do you think? And there's actually one huge flaw in our interview process that's there today and is a huge issue right now. Any thoughts on what that is? Mary, any thoughts?
I don't know about flaws. I think it's just changed over the years. I know for me, when I'm trying to hire somebody, what's more important to me is making sure that they're driven, like more of the intrinsic characteristics of a person rather than maybe the skills, because I believe skills can be learned, but if they have that learning ability, I would definitely consider it over having that skill up front.
Yeah, listen, you touched on a couple, but the biggest thing is managers' bias. That's the biggest flaw in the interview process today. Managers are inherently biased. And by the way, let me just get this. Everyone's inherently biased. Everyone is biased. And again, everyone has biases. Doesn't matter. You can't argue it. It's just whether or not you acknowledge those biases. But what we know is that a manager is going to have bias. And what does that mean? They hire for themselves, not the organization. That's a really important piece. They'll hire for themselves, which means they're going to hire someone who is like them, not necessarily different. So that's where a lot of the diversity issues come into today, is that we don't have that. And by the way, it's natural. It doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from a bad place, but it's something that we have to recognize. Unconscious bias in the workplace stems directly from the significant bias that sits in today's interview process. It is a truly biased piece because traditionally it is the manager interviewing and asking all the questions, and it's kind of a one-stop shop. And when it's one manager picking, you're going to have a biased interview process. Obviously, some of the flaws is candidates can pretend to be authentic. They can fake their way through it. Listen, we're all programmed to do that. There's a lot of articles out there how to do it. And again, the typical questions, which means, every interview candidate, again, you go online and go, there's probably a half a dozen to a dozen questions that are always asked. And again, candidates know how to fly through this. So what we've got is a process traditionally that really isn't very good at getting us the best possible candidate. And so that's where we kind of have looked quite heavily at, and ourselves and other people of like, what is the best way to interview? And so how to overcome those flaws is really making sure that you have behavioral-based activities or questions, panel interviews, and in some ways reference checks, even though they might be a little outdated, there's still some value in that. And so think about these now in your interview process and whether some of these things are evident. So first of all, behavior questions. And again, I'm going to go back to what we talked about with values. You've all talked about this. You can't teach character. You really look for that obviously ideal. And so behavioral questions based on your values. And again, if you have a value, say one of your values is creativity. So then you need to have questions based around creativity. And behavioral questions is really just from research that says actions and activities and behaviors in the past is a good indicator of behaviors, activities in the future. So the typical questions might be around the values of creativity. Tell me a time you had to be creative in a stressful situation. Tell me a time you were creative and able to take advantage of an opportunity. What you want to be able to do is link them back to your values so that the conversation is driven around to look for that cultural match. And so that's the first piece. And the thing that I always say is a good candidate would have done their homework and looked at your values. They'll be ready for this. But a bad candidate, someone that doesn't do their research about you and comes in and struggles with a question about your mission or values that was on the website, is a really good indicator about attention to detail and maybe some other character elements that you might be looking out for. So keep that in mind. As I think Mary said before, it's not just about the skills. We really want to look for some of those qualities. She talked about learning, which I think is a very important one. So again, ask behavioral questions about learning or those things that are most important to you. So again, behavioral questions should drive whatever the interview looks like. The next one that I think is really powerful that a lot of organizations engage with is the panel interviews. This is really important because again, what you'll want to do is put a panel preferably of employees. And again, when we used to do these at Ritz-Carlton, it used to be a test of whether or not they could handle multiple people coming at them with questions in a succinct process. I always said that after we had a 6-person panel that would ask questions, and each of them were allowed to ask one question. And I always said, if someone could come out of that still smiling after 20 minutes, it would mean that I would feel better that they could do that in front of our guests or customers. And so what you want to be able to do is utilize employees in a panel or a one-on-one, like a speed dating interview, where they're able to ask 1 or 2 questions and you're able to get the panel's feedback. What I found very effective is when you do a panel type interview or sort of a group interview, that you give them each a scorecard, and rather than the manager making that selection process, it's the group making the process. And you might have a rating system on look, style, how they answer questions, how did they engage, some very simple pieces, but each of the panel had to give a very simple rating. It's a yes or no, a 1 or a 2. And what we found is it's much more likely that you would get, again, diversity, as long as there's diversity in the panel within your final selection, or get narrowing down the group to the final list. One of the other piece that is a really great outcome of this, which people often forget about, is that when a manager hires somebody and sort of says, hey, I've hired John, the rest of the group looks at John and goes, okay, we don't have to make you successful. So there's this kind of us versus them. They're going to kind of stand back. When a panel or a group interview is placed, particularly with employees, what we think is very powerful is that the staff are much more likely to want that person to be successful and will do something about it. So when the research was done based on how to make someone successful, it was found that when someone was involved in the interview process, they are far more likely to make the candidate feel welcome, make them set up for success, make sure their training is okay, which are all things that are very, very important for the candidate to be successful. So behavioral questions is a good first step. Panel interviews or group interviews with behavioral questions, an excellent kind of step to start to remove some of those traditional biases. Then there's the activity-based interviews, and this is probably where we're starting to see more and more. And we're certainly, when we do recruitment strategies for organizations, we're doing a lot more activity-based interviews. What does this look like? It's really about creating some activities that really align with values and personalities. Now, I can give you an example, and again, we've done this a couple of times now, that in the interviews for groups, we would bring a group of people in at one time. So maybe there's 10 people, and we'd put them in what we call a social happy hour situation, which is, again, coffee. We had a situation for one of our hotels in Las Vegas where it was very important to be appreciative of the arts for this one position. And so what we did is we had a coffee. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. We had a coffee social hour. There was about 15 to 20 people there, and there was a musician in the background, and there was 2 pieces of art placed on the wall. No attention was brought to it. And in that social interaction, there was 4 or 5 managers walking around and engaging. What they were looking for was 3 elements. 1, could you have a conversation with them? Were they comfortable? Second, did they pay any attention to the artwork or the musician playing in the background? And then the final part of it is we asked them questions later in the interview about the musician and the art that was in the background. What that allowed us to do, it started to kind of give some confirmation that this arts, it was again as a host for an art gallery, but it was a very experiential piece, that the person obviously was focused on social interaction and was very good at that, but it was the attention that they played and the appreciation they later displayed for the art and the musician that was the key to the interview process. So that is something that to think about. One of our favorite companies is Lego. And again, I'm not sure if you saw the last couple of years, there's a few videos if you go onto YouTube and look and do the Lego interview process. And in fact, they're making it a reality game series. I think it's come out, or it was scheduled to come out, where Lego is famous in its interview for actually they'll bring a group of people in, and if they get through the first pre-screening, first phase, they then put a group of people into a room with a big pile of Lego on the floor. And then they just watch. They are looking for some of the really important values that make Lego, which is based around teamwork, leadership, and of course, the love of Lego. What's fascinating is they get people into this situation and they'll get comments like, oh my God, it's a kid's toy, or I'm not playing with Lego, that's stupid. All of these things are said because it's a natural reaction to Lego versus someone who jumps in and goes, oh my God, Lego. Lego wants people to be able to have fun, be creative, be team orientated, and obviously want to love their product. So again, it's a really cool idea of seeing people get in and just kind of having fun with that. What I'd urge is really think about how you can bring an activity-based interview activity into your interview process. Another one we just did for a retail organization is we created a number of customer scenarios. And part of the interview process was we would put a scenario. So we put a customer in front of them with a little sort of details. You know, this is the person, they're a mother, they had 2 children with them, coming in looking for a gift for their husband, something like that. What we gave them is this scenario, and they had a couple of minutes to think about it. And then they had to kind of report back, here's how I would approach, here's the suggestion I would make. And it allowed us to put them into a customer-facing situation, obviously without facing a customer, but giving them that insight into how they would approach and be creative in a moment on how to take care of somebody in a retail situation. So activity-based interviews is, I can't say it's a thing of the future, but it's actually here now. A lot of organizations are big into it. It's another great way to remove bias. It's a great way to take the edge off asking the same old questions. So I really encourage you to think about how you can place an activity-based interview into the process. Remember, linking it back, obviously, to the values that you've got. And then I have to put a few words in for the reference checks. Listen, I'm going to say it right now. Reference checks are very much a hit or miss. You know, it's one of those things that a lot of managers say, oh, it's a waste of time. They never get anything, and I get it. Sometimes it can be a waste of time. Calling a previous manager in an organization, many times the HR will put limitations on what they can say, et cetera. So I get it. It's not the most fun, but it is still proven to be quite valuable in that chance that you actually get someone willing to talk to you. And so what I always say is, like, don't give up on reference checks, even though you might have had some bad situations, because you will still find managers out there willing to talk, particularly former managers. Again, I always say don't call the current manager. But again, previous managers, much more likely to talk. So usually there's a skip in, hey, it's not someone that they've worked with for a year, maybe a couple of years. I always say be prepared and have your best questions. You know, there's the traditional questions. You know, you want to confirm time. Was this their role? That generally gets kicked off to the HR group. But again, have just 1 or 2 of your best questions ready to go. Because if you do get lucky enough to get a manager to talk about it, you can get fantastic insights into that. And then the other thing is really important. If you do happen to get a previous manager, ask, how would I best work with or get the best out of this candidate? This is really important because it helps to understand your leadership style and whether or not you're going to be able to get the best out of this person. And so, and then the next question is, what is the one thing I should work on? So keep that in mind. I always say it's about 4 questions. Ask one behavioral, ask how you could best work, one thing you should work on that they could improve on. Generally, you'll ask a candidate for strengths and weaknesses. This is another way to ask it to a previous manager. And of course, the catch-all one, would you hire this person? Again, is a great insight. So listen, I do reference checks. I'm responsible for them myself. I take them because many times they are a little frustrating because you don't get much, but man, when you do, you can get wonderful insights about your candidate. And at the end, I kind of just want to go back to where I said at the start. I said there is no 100% foolproof process for perfecting, selecting the right candidate. But at the end of the day, I think there is one thing that really helps, and that's patience. Of all the things, and we're in a busy world, and there's a lot of managers that have a lot of pressure. They really want to get someone in because the stress of being short-staffed is very real. I understand it. I've been there. I've done that. But when it comes down to it, hiring the first person that comes across because you need a warm body. Secondly, looking only for the person with the most experience because you don't have to train them as much is a traditional and very real flaw in why you might not be getting the best candidate or why that person will leave you in a very short amount of time. Keep in mind, and I love this quote, Jerry Buss, American businessman, owner of the Lakers, Los Angeles Lakers, my favorite basketball team. This is something that I think is there. You can always see skillful players. You can see candidates out there with a lot of experience, but the question is, are you willing to wait to find that skillful player? They have the job fit with the match, cultural match, high character. Because eventually, remember, the character is what wins out, and it's going to be the most valuable resource that you are able to get out of your recruitment process. What I always say is, remember, the purpose of recruitment, and again, in many situations, is not to find the person with the best expertise or most experience. It's to find the person who's going to be the most successful with your team today and be long-term with the organization because they're a good fit. So keep that in mind. Understand that it is a process, and of all the things in the world where we're told to hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, this is the one area I'd say, hey, slow down, be patient, get the right person, because that investment will truly play out in the long term. So that's kind of like what I wanted to talk about today. So questions for me, Mary, Mark, Claudia, any questions, thoughts about recruitment that you're dealing with that maybe we can put out to the group?
Nope, no questions here. Basically, that's kind of what we're applying here at Stanley.
Awesome. Fantastic to hear. Claudia, thoughts?
Yes, I have a question. I understand about the behavior for the candidate, but because I think in hospitality or the customer service, they can lose the temper.
Yep.
And I think when the customer is always right, I mean, I think it's really important to know about with these questions about what happened with the stress, about this candidate can manage the stress, because sometimes not sometimes I think it's not usual to lose the temper with a client.
Claudia, that's a really great point. And again, I go back to a couple of points. First of all, customers never always right. You just make them feel that way most of the time. And how do we do that? Very important point. So one of the behavioral questions you want to ask is, what do you do under stress? Tell me at a time you were under severe stress, and how did you handle it? Tell me, how do you handle stressful situations on the job and at home? I think those are really good questions. And then that's why at the Ritz-Carlton, we were doing panel interviews very early on, or group interviews. Like I said, it was more like a speed dating. We didn't do panels. We did 5-minute interviews one after another. So the candidate would be in a room, and every 5 minutes, a new person would come in and ask them questions. And what that did is that the candidate never got completely comfortable. All right, I get a rapport with this, and then the next person comes in. We actually created a very mild, stressful situation for some people to see how they would handle. Can they still smile after going through 5 or 6 of these quick speed type interviews? So I think that's really a good way. And then the other one is go back to your activity-based interviews. again, creating a mildly stressful situation. Even the Lego candidate, again, that should not be a stressful situation, but for some people it was stressful of what do I do with a bunch of kids' toys? It was very, very obvious and very quickly to see how people would react. The stress that we talked about of giving them a customer scenario and giving them a minute to think about, and then tell us, how would you handle, what would you do in different situations? So I agree with you. Understanding how someone performs under stress. Listen, we can't do a Marine or Army boot camp and put them under really severe stress, because we'd get in all sorts of grief. But you can create that stress of interaction and talking and having to get them to think on their feet. And again, it's not always perfect, but that's a great way to think about it. So make sure it's in your behavioral questions. Talk about stress, talk about how they deal with stress, and use the panel or group interviews of one after another, the speed dating type interviews. And again, think about your activities, whether you can add an element into that show that can be frustrating. One organization we worked with did brain teasers. I know Mark kind of said that can be a little outdated, or, you know, the whole idea of, all right, it's a pencil, but you'd put a brain teaser, and actually a lot of the tech companies were famous for this. They'd put a brain teaser in front of people at the start of the interview. And I'm going to tell you, some people would get so frustrated with brain teasers, and it's because they don't use both sides of their brain. They get really frustrated in a situation. So even something as simple as a brain teaser can bring out the stress and frustration with someone in a very mild, what I'd call mild way. And it's interesting to watch people and see what they would do with that. So great question, Claudia. And again, hopefully there's some ideas in there. Really think about how to bring that out.
Thank you.
Cool. Great. Mark, any thoughts? I think it's still in there somewhere. There he comes. I know you're on mute again, Mark. You'll get.
I don't have anything. I have nothing.
Perfect. All right, Abraham, that's back to you, man.
Gotta unmute
You're
myself
on mute.
here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so want to thank everybody for showing up here, and I want to make sure that I know you probably saw that Shane has a really nice offer. Shane, you want to give me back control of this screen here so I can share? I just want to, I want to show this here to everybody if you haven't seen it, just in case. So Shane has here for you guys that if your company have 50 or more employees, which is really good here. He's got like $3,000 worth of Culture Hacker Power Tools for, he's offering that for you to be able to, for you to be able to do the improvements like Shane's been talking about here. As you can see, there's quite a bit of stuff, and you get even the consultation to take these webinars to the next level, because obviously you're coming to these webinars here to improve yourself or to validate things that you're doing. We find a lot of people coming on. In fact, Charles is going to be watching the replay. So hi, Charles. You know, he's been, he let me know he couldn't make it this time. So I just want to give him a shout out here. Anyway, so you're welcome to go ahead and to get this. We do these. Shane gives like 4 of these out a month because they're quite expensive, and but he wants to make sure that to those people who do qualify for this particular offer here, they're able to take the webinar here to that next level. Okay, so feel free to fill out this form here. I'll put the link. Here you go. It's usually comes in the thank you here, and you can pick that up. And hang on, let me just put this in the chat here. And let me just stop my share now so I can get to the chat. So here you go. Here's the link. And there you go. Everyone's welcome to take a look at that offer there, and that's it. So does anybody have any questions about that offer, or questions for Shane for anything else, or no? Okay, well, great. Well, thank you,
everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We'll be back on for next week. Let's see what next week's webinar is coming up here. And let me see here what we got here. We got for next week.
Is it next week?
Yeah, we got one for next week, another webinar. So we're having this whole series that are coming on now. If you didn't get the replays, let me know, for all the other webinars, because we've been doing a lot. I don't know, we got like 16, I don't know how many webinars we've done so far, but just let me know and I'll make sure you get the different replays, and or if there's a particular one that you want to get, just let me know that. And we'll make sure you get that. I just want to see. You'll get a reminder email about the next webinar coming up. Anyway, this one is why so much talent is lost within the first 60 days of being hired and how to improve your orientation and onboarding. So, hey, that sounds awesome, Shane. So there you go. So we got more stuff coming for you. And that's it. I don't have anything else to say about that unless somebody else would like to, offer some insights and things to what Shane is saying. Say, Mary, you're in a pretty high position over at Black & Decker. What kind of advice maybe you can offer to us?
Advice, I don't know about advice, but basically the behavioral questions that we do ask during the interviewing process is something that we're doing right now. In the middle of doing panel interviews as well. As far as the activity-based type interview, right? I think with the COVID-19, but something definitely to consider in the future if we ever get to that point. So yeah, I mean, all good stuff. Basically, things that our company has been on board with for quite some time now. So it's all good, and it's a really good way of understanding your candidate's position as far as their level, their skill level, and their willingness and adaptability. Because right now, those are what's important to the business, is that you are flexible, adaptable. Are you good with change? Because the organizations are constantly changing, so you have to make sure that you've got the right people in place that's going to support it.
Yeah, you guys put some tools out there and see what they do with them, like the Legos.
Do we do that?
Yeah.
No, not that I'm aware of. No.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. You get, in fact, now that you're in the COVID where everybody's online, you might want to see what they're doing. Get thrown. Say, hey, what would you do if we gave you this drill?
Absolutely.
There's some creative stuff. I know Shane's talked about some really creative stuff about the COVID-19 and leadership, and that these ideas have been really resonating with people here. So I don't think you've been to those webinars. So if you'd like, would you like me to shoot you some of those past webinars?
Sure.
Okay, great. And that offer there, do you think that offer would be something that you could use?
No, not right now.
Okay. So, all right. So anyway, Mark, you have any insights or anything you'd like to share? Nothing. All right. All right. Very well. Then thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I hope you guys come back on for our next episode of Shane Green.
See you guys.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.